This is the McLaren GT, and it's said to be a very different McLaren and a very different GT. Now this one is supposed to be the most chilled out McLaren you can buy, but that's if you can consider a car with a 620 horsepower, 630 Newton meter, 4-litre twin turbocharged V8 petrol engine chilled out. And what makes it unique in the world of GTs is its engine position. Now where typical GTs have their engine up front, the McLaren GT positions it just behind the passenger cell. Yup, this is a mid-engine GT and the formula is very different. This mid-engine layout dictates the way the GT looks and the way it drives. I'll talk looks later because 620 horsepower. Now, this is my first time in a McLaren, so pardon me if I talk of more everyday concerns right at the very start. Now, as soon as I got in, one thing I really appreciated was this lovely view out. It really counts for a lot when you're driving a low-slung car as this in Indian conditions. I also really like the fact that the pedals are well positioned, the steering and seats have a lot of adjustability, and these paddles are absolutely lovely to use. And no need to memorize which button does what on the steering because there aren't any. There's a dedicated stock for common functions behind the wheel, just as you'd find in the cars that led up to your McLaren purchase. What also makes life that much easier in town is the option to increase ride height. So as standard, the GT has 110 millimeters of ground clearance. The suspension lift function adds in another 20 millimeters, and when you are in a car with a nose as long as Pinocchio's, you need all the help that you can get. You aren't cut off from the happenings below, but the ride is actually more supple and absorbent than the wafer-thin Pirelli P0s would lead you to believe. What that means is you won't have to check in for a deep tissue massage after every long drive. And if you so choose, you can get some relatively quiet time in the GT too. Outside noises are also pretty well suppressed and the engine actually sounds quite civil. That still, you move this knob to the right that opens the exhaust valves, and what you get are increased decibel levels. The engine comes alive, and with it, so do you. The engine is at your ready service, just waiting to flex. Power in the mid-range is explosive. The pushback onto your seat as the rev gauge hunts for 8,000 RPM is very real and very intense. You heard that right, 8,000 RPM. And to think this is the most relaxed McLaren. The 7-speed dual-clutch transmission is only too happy to oblige with quick shifts. What's cool is that shift feel at the pedals also changes with the modes. The paddle shifters, when you use them, give this beautiful mechanical feel that just sucks you in further into the drive. The GT goes all out to deliver on the very serious numbers on the spec page. 0 to 100 kph, 3.2 seconds. 0 to 200 kph, 9 seconds. And a top speed of 326 kilometers per hour. It's not the long-legged performance that you'd get in a traditional GT like a Bentley Continental GT or an Aston Martin DB11. The McLaren is all about instant bursts of power. Where the mid-engine McLaren is also very different to the front-engine British GTs is in handling. The chassis feels sharp, it feels reactive, and the McLaren GT actually makes the other GTs appear lazy and as if they've been brought up on a full-fat diet. And it's not just down to the centralized weight distribution, but the weight itself. At 1530 kgs, the McLaren is a good few hundred kilos lighter than its aforementioned rivals. It's sharper on the brakes too. Carbon ceramic discs are standard. Also helping ultimate feel is the GT's use of a hydraulic power steering. Yes, it calls for some more effort at low speeds, but things get better the moment you build speed. because that well-oiled nature of a hydraulic steering comes shining right through, and it just gives you that distinct connect with the car that you don't get in most of its rivals. But purists, and I mean the sort who are interested in a Grand Tourer for its virtues as a Grand Tourer, will find the McLaren GT too extreme. It can't quite hide the fact that it's a fast and furious car first and an easygoing gentleman's express later. It comes across more supercar-y than the Ferrari Roma 2. Proper GT or not, question is, can you really enjoy a car like this in India? Now you could argue, what really is the point of buying a car like a McLaren GT in India? Now, formerly I would have said it's all about glamour and exclusivity and whatnot. But with the road network in India developing the way it is, the expressways popping up all across the country, you can actually make the most of what this car is actually built for, and that is cover huge distances with absolute ease. A Mumbai to Delhi run in a McLaren doesn't sound unthinkable anymore. Word of an Instagram-friendly subject seems to have spread in the vicinity, so time for one last blast to the serene confines of Oleander Farms in Karjat. It's a flamboyant exit thanks to the doors that swivel upwards. Thankfully, the showmanship doesn't entail yogic postures for occupants because the sills are not all that wide, so getting out is not a tricky exercise. This very GT scarlet red means it's been wrongly identified as a Ferrari a couple of times over the day, but if you know your cars, the blunt nose and mid-engine silhouette are unmistakably McLaren. But identifying this as the GT within the McLaren universe needs a keener eye. Longer overhangs give the GT a more flowing stance, and it's also relatively subtle in its detailing. No 720-like over-the-top aero openings at the headlights here, and even the exhaust pipes are at bumper level rather than by the tail lights. It's an altogether cleaner form that works for this type of car. Peering into the rear glass won't give you a view of the engine, but of the luggage space above, that's meant to host soft bags or a golf set. There's another bay under the bonnet for cabin baggage. Luggage space is limited, but then you'll ever only be packing for two. That's because unlike all the GT rivals that are 2+2s, the McLaren GT is a strict two-seater. The cabin correspondingly feels snugger than rivals, though in actual fact there's no shortage of space. Material quality on the whole is really good too, but you wouldn't describe the cabin as opulent or warm as you would a Bentley's. It looks a bit clinical, a place for serious business. Of the other things, the portrait-oriented 7-inch touchscreen is responsive and the 12.3-inch digital dials are info-rich. Why it's home to the reversing camera display beats me. Half lock obscures the screen completely. So, how much would a McLaren GT set you back by? You might want to sit down for this. It starts at 4.59 crore rupees ex-showroom. What's more frightening is that the GT is the entry point to the McLaren range. It's pricey even in the stratospheric world it operates in, but for what it's worth, a lot of features offered as options on rivals are standard fit for India market GTs. A low, over-endowed two-seater is not the right car for India. But it's safe to assume buyers with the financial firepower to spend for one already have a high-end SUV as a daily driver. Cars like the GT are an extravagance. As a car, it offers a very different take on the Grand Tourer, one that trades some practicality for driver involvement. The right way to see the McLaren GT is as a supercar that also does comfort well. Can't argue with that.